The title actually flummoxed a few people. This is a conference in Musselburgh a couple of months ago for the Edinburgh, Lothian and Borders Conference. I was asked to go along and talk about ACFA and Border Archaeological Society, BAS, our activities in the Halter Burn Valley, right in the border with England and Scotland. In fact, quite a bit of the surveys took place in England itself. Phrenological fortunes. Well, you all know what phrenology is, and I was looking at this image of the hills and I felt that they looked like heads, skulls, hence the title Phrenological Fortunes. I sometimes feel we're walking or feeling our way across the landscape, looking for little telltale bumps and lumps that will tell us a wee bit about the past history of the landscape. So there you go, Phrenological Fortunes. For those of you who don't know, Halter Burn Valley is right in the border down here, this little kink in the border. Here we are, there's Kelso. This purple line here is the border. So we're bordering Roxburghshire and Northumberland National Park. The survey was divided into 4 parts: Halter Burn Head Farm, Thompson's Walls, Shotton Hill and Yetham Mains. Okay. 2 of the survey reports have been published: Halter Burn Head Farm and Shotton Hill in England. One of the things that I'm always amazed at is the fact that in such a wee country such as Scotland, how in such a short distance the landscape and the archaeology and the culture can change. We're used to working in Perthshire, we're used to working in Western Islands like Ling, Tiree, and so forth, Rassay, and so forth, where the landscape's very, very much different from what we're finding or what we found down in the borders. The archaeology is totally different from what I had experienced before, as we shall see. It's a mixed pastoral arable history. We've got prehistoric cultivation terraces. If you can see my little pointer down towards the right-hand corner there, where they have been excavated elsewhere in Northumberland, some of them have been found to have a Neolithic history. So we've got Neolithic cultivation, we've got medieval cultivation in the form of the rigs, of which the whole valley really has been cultivated, and you can still see where the rig and furrows are, even though some of the fields have been ploughed and manicured. A feature of the valley's archaeology are these, what we're calling Iron Age farmsteads or homesteads, and I'll talk about a few of those as we go along. The valley also has a number of forts, and to the right here, this is Green Humbleton Fort. There's another fort up at the top left-hand corner, Wild Goose Fort. The survey area was watershed to watershed, so the watershed on the west side was along here and up over these hills. We'll start with the top of the watercourse, which is part of the River Tweed catchment area. The interesting thing about the top of the valley is that it hasn't suffered the manicured agriculture that we saw further down the valley. We've got a range of monuments here. There's a nice cluster of Bronze Age unenclosed platforms. There's another wee group there. We've got a funerary cairn. In fact, there's another one we found later on. We've got unenclosed and enclosed settlements. We've got a lovely set of enclosed settlements here, 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 and here. There's 2 of the forts. There's White Now Fort, or White Law Fort in the Atlas of British hill forts, Wild Goose Hill. And we've got post-medieval settlement in the form of Halter Burn Head Farm and its predecessor, Old Halter Burn Head Farm. Okay, so it's just a flavour of the range of monuments that we've got at the head of the valley. Here it is looking up towards the watershed. This is the head of the Halter Burn. On this ridge, we've got a lovely enclosed settlement, another one here, another one here. They're dotted all over the place. And to my mind, these are to do with transhumance. To be honest, even if the climate had been a degree or two warmer, in the winter time, even these places would be horrendous to live in. So I think they're summer pastures. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. This is the old Halter Burn Head post-medieval settlement here. It's now a ruin. And we've got a lovely medieval moated settlement here. Well, according to the Royal Commission, that is. There's been some planting going on at the headwaters. This was part of the carbon capture program. Unfortunately, they ploughed through a prehistoric settlement, which is a real shame. It's totally gone. Right, we're down at the bottom of the valley, looking southwards. Where we were previously is up at the top left here. That's the head of the valley. And you can see that there's more of these lovely manicured fields. It certainly made field archaeology a lot easier. We could see from above that there's very little present. But when I was preparing this talk for the Musselburgh conference, I don't know if you can all see that. There's this circular mark on the soil here, and we think that's another unrecorded settlement site. So that was a nice find right at the death. Unfortunately, it's delaying the publication of the report because we're going to have to go and have a look at it. Here we are looking down the valley. The border with England comes up here and up between these two hills. This is Coldsmouth Hill up at the top right. It's got a pair of lovely Bronze Age ring cairns on its summit, one of which we drew up. I'm not going to be talking about the English side of the border. This talk, I'll leave that for another one. Down here, we've got a settlement right in the centre of the image. We've got a little structure that maybe be late medieval, post-medieval in origin, and we'll come back to that shortly. I mentioned earlier about a Bronze Age funerary monument. Strangely, this wasn't picked up by the Royal Commission, but they had bigger fish to fry, I suppose. It's been robbed out, but the chamber is still very visible. Here it is in plan, down at the bottom here, feature 28. It's sitting beside a medieval house platform with its related scooped enclosure. And so we can see where the robbed stone has gone. The robbed stone for the house has been taken obviously from the funerary monument. We've got another medieval house platform with its related enclosure further down the valley. So these were two nice finds. Not much left of them now, of course. Behind is what's locally known as the Peniel or Halter Burn. It's mainly deserted now. The house is deserted. There is a shepherd still staying in one of the houses. We don't know much about the history of this place, unfortunately. The unenclosed platforms can be difficult to spot, but this one is quite a nice example because it's got a lovely dry stone revetment along its frontage there. Although this site, I'm kind of squeamish about calling it a Bronze Age unenclosed platform. It's unusual in its situation. down by the stream there. It could be something later to do with sheep washing or whatever. There's a nice wee track behind it. So I'm sort of reserving judgment on this one being Bronze Age in date. But there are good examples of unenclosed Bronze Age platforms strung along more or less the same contour, much as what you find elsewhere in Northumberland and the southern Scotland. This would be a nice one to excavate, actually, because it's got some interesting little stone settings. So couldn't photograph it. It could only be photographed by drone, unfortunately. So we've just got this drawing to show it off. I've mentioned transhumance. There's two hills in the valley called Shieling Hill. There's one further to the north, further down the valley, but unfortunately it's covered in a conifer plantation. But we've got this one, which I think I would say is a form of shieling found in the borders, different from the sort of sheilings we would find in Perthshire or in the Western Isles. It's got a yard, it's got a house, and it's got some associated outbuildings. This side here, this little trough, I think here could be a sheep bucht, where sheep would be maybe clipped or marked or whatever. Here it is on the ground. There's the yard. I hope you can all see this little pointer I've got. There's the yard there. The house is here, right in the front, and there are little outbuildings to either side, and some nice rig you can see in the hill at the back. Thanks to these animals, we found this site, because otherwise we would never have found it. It's so low in the landscape. If the whole of Scotland was covered in vegetation like this, we'd find a lot more archaeology. But it's one of the problems facing the field archaeologists, of course, is the height of the vegetation. It can be a real nuisance at times. Looking at some of the prehistoric features, what age these enclosed settlements are, we just don't know. Bronze Age, Neolithic, we don't know. But they've got nice little hut platforms within the enclosed space. In fact, our survey, found a previously unrecorded hut platform, which was a nice find. They're all nice finds when it comes down to it. I said I would have a look at some of these Iron Age settlements. Here's one that was not drawn by the Commission. The Royal Commission visited the valley just prior to and just after the Second World War, and I think they were targeting features that they'd found from aerial photographs, because they certainly didn't bother about a lot of the small features. This is an interesting site. They didn't draw it. Don't blame them. It's quite difficult to draw, but it's certainly got a couple of nice enclosed level areas, and also some other little areas that could have been to house animals, livestock, sheep or cattle. This is an interesting site also because it's got a little cairn with an upright orthostat on its summit. Whether that's another funerary monument or not, I don't know. Also of interest is the later structures, very low in the ground, very difficult to see. Again, if the vegetation had been about 15 centimetres high, then we'd never have seen them. Whether it's another farmstead or whether it's a shieling, it's too difficult to call, actually. Here's the moated medieval site I was talking about. Well, the Commission call it a moated medieval site. We get really excited when we saw this, thinking it was a henge monument. Huge, deep ditches. Down at the bottom right is the old Halter Burn head, post-medieval settlement, or the ruins of it, I should say. The drone image is courtesy of the late Richard Strathy. Okay. Another aspect of the survey was the documentary evidence that was provided by the late Elizabeth Watson, who was a member of BAS and a member of the Yetholm History Society. She brought our attention to several 16th and 17th century documents. And this is where I think it's one of the most satisfying things about field archaeology is when you can tie what you're finding on the ground with the documentary evidence, and how it can bring to light some errors, shall we say, in the maps. One of the documents talks about the boundaries or the marches of a particular piece of ground, and it mentions White Now Syke, White Now and White Law. This is White Law, and it's on the maps as White Law. Any OS map, tell you it's White Law. There's a fort here on this little pimple. It's called White Law Fort. So there has to be a wee change in the maps here. So I think maybe a wee letter to Ordnance Survey pointing them the direction of this document, which we can provide them a copy of. So this should be called White Now Fort and not White Law Fort. So it was a nice little addition to the field archaeology. Here's White Law Fort, or White Now Fort, as we should call it. It's a strange thing because it only takes up really one side of the hill. It's very different from all the other forts in the valley. It wasn't drawn up by the commission. Again, I don't blame them. There's a big dry stone dike going across there. Here it is here. So you can see that across the dike on this side, whether the fort builders merely relied on the little outcrops there, forming little cliffs, I don't know, but there's no evidence of anything here on the other side of that dry stone dike. But there is evidence for, well, little level areas that may have been created to house the settlement. Other little prehistoric features we're finding, barrows and these little circular monuments, which could be called ring cairns or ring ditch cairns. I'm not sure about the nomenclature there. It's much like hut circles and roundhouses. We usually get confused about the two. So this is a nice little find, previously unrecorded. Across the valley, there's another one, too difficult to photograph. It's covered in quite thick grass, but you can see it's quite nice with the ditch around most of its perimeter. So that was another nice unrecorded find. Below White Now Fort, there's another one of these scoop settlements of whether they're Iron Age or earlier in date is difficult. The commission drew it up. Here's a little drawing. They drew things up at strange scales, but we had a good look at this site and we felt that it actually required a closer attention. So we drew it up, and indeed it brought to light a few more features that weren't apparent in the commission drawing. One of the problems drawing these big sites, if it's windy, which it normally is in the valley, blowing the tapes around. So we could look upon these more as measured sketches rather than absolute accurate 1 to 100 drawings. But it's quite a fair rendition of what's there. And it does add to our knowledge of that monument. Further down the valley, there's the well-known Witchcleuch Grange, which may have had a relationship with Kelso Abbey. Abbeys and manor houses were quite important in the medieval times. They all had their transhumant or shilling sites related to the home farms, if you like. This was drawn up by the Commission. We didn't redraw it, but we did find 8 features within the Grange and several out with the Grange. To the left there, there's a later settlement, but it's got what we think is a big sheep house. There was a tower house down at D here, and various other little enclosures which we added to. Over here are the remains of a big corn drying kiln. So a nice settlement. Here it is from an aerial photograph, courtesy of Richard Carleton. The lettering in white is what the Commission found, and the lettering in black is what we found. Again, from documentary evidence, we knew that a mill had been built beside the Grange, and indeed we found it up the top right-hand corner here, feature 26. It's a horizontal mill. There's very little of it left, but we did find it. So again, that was a nice tie-in with documentary evidence and what's on the ground. Here we are back to one of our earlier illustrations, again courtesy of Richard Carleton. Another scoop settlement, this time more or less on the level, unlike most of them which are scooped into the hillside. There's also down here, there's another big scoop settlement, and perhaps another one over here. So the landscape is certainly studied with archaeology. As again, I reiterate, it's so different from what we're finding in the Highlands and Islands. That's Shiel now, so the little shieling site I was talking about earlier on with the yard and the house, just there by the woodland. The scoop settlement right in the centre bottom of the picture there. Here it is in plan. Wasn't drawn up by the Commission. It's multi-period, and we found evidence for little hut sites and possibly earlier footings at the top left there. A beautiful site, a nice site to draw. Wish they were all like that. Just last year, we knew there was a quarry here because it's marked as a quarry on the map. But when we looked at it from above, lo and behold, there's a previously unrecorded scooped settlement. It's been partly impinged upon by the waste from the quarry, but it is there, and it's got some nice cultivation terraces round about it. So that was a lovely find, and it adds to the whole corpus of archaeology in the valley. There's another fort here. Unfortunately, it's covered in vegetation, so we couldn't really see anything at all. This is the fort we've already looked at, Green Humbleton. This is burnt Humbleton Fort. There's not much left of it. This is Yetholm, a Kirk Yetholm and Town Yetholm behind, just to orientate yourselves. Now, burnt Humbleton, again, documentary evidence from the 16th century says that a horse fold was built on top of burnt Humbleton. The Commission obviously didn't know about that document, and when they drew up the fort, they didn't include this enclosure, which we think is the horse fold mentioned in that early document. This is an outer perimeter of the fort. This is an inner rampart. So we're fairly confident, in fact, we're very confident confident that that is the horsefold from the 15th or 16th century. Nice find. We're dead chuffed. The stopstones. Traditionally, this was the crowning place of the local gypsy kings and queens. There's two of them. An old document mentions 3 stones, so whether one's been destroyed, I don't know. For aficionados of orthostats, the tops of orthostats mirroring the horizon, well, there's Burnt Hambleton Fort mirroring the top of the stone. If we look the other way, there's White Now or White Law Fort up there. Again, the stones mirroring in some form the horizon. Whether you follow that sort of thing or not, well, I think it's quite a nice example. Documents mention herds going up to ensure that the English didn't encroach their animals into Scotland. Although I should have said that the Halter Burn itself was at one time the border between Scotland and England. So this was Yetham Common, so it was common ground. It was contested. It was either in Scotland or England at various points in its history. But the documents mention that the shepherds going up to shillings at night time. So they're not technically not shillings, they're more herds' huts. And this is an example of one, which we think might be the one that's mentioned in an old document that outlines the marches or boundaries of Yetham Common. So that's a really nice thing to have found. And just last year, we came across what we think might be a little medieval settlement. We've got 1, 2, 3 little scooped enclosures, or perhaps even a dwelling. This is us looking southeast. There's Halter Burn Head Farm and Old Halter Burn Head. There's the top of the valley just in there, the top of the watercourse. So this is a nice find. Here's one of the scoops. If this wall was to continue, then I suspect that might be a house. So we might have a little farmstead that's been previously unrecorded in the valley. Another nice find. I mentioned post-medieval structure, halfland or halfway house. So again, it was drawn up by the survey teams, photographed, and we had our resident architect, Scott Wood, who made some nice little drawings of the elevations. Coming into the 20th century, we've got a lovely water management system supplying water to two mill wheels, one at the farm just behind here and another to a farm to the right there. This used to be a big mill pond. On the maps, it's a mill pond. There's a weir here, and Keith informed us just recently that they're going to remove that weir to allow the movement of fish upstream. So this is part of a water management scheme that's quite complex. Mundane archaeology, well, it's got to be recorded. Here's a little water trough cemented in, and it looks quite innocuous until you look closely, and there's names, initials inscribed into the concrete, and a coin. Unfortunately, we couldn't make out the date. It's part of the archaeological history of the valley, just as much as these Iron Age scooped enclosures are. Future archaeology, as is the Bowser here, which will be left to rot. It's quite incredible how farmers leave equipment lying about the hillside. Yeah. Other modern features include this I think this is a cattle crush sitting on a concrete platform. The local shepherd thought it might be a cattle feeder, but I can't see how the cattle would get their heads down to feed. I think it's maybe a crush for cattle. I'm coming towards the end here, and as I said at the Musselburgh conference, this is the most important archaeological site in the whole valley to me. The dike here is the border between England, which is behind, and Scotland in the foreground. Part of its course followed on top of a turf bank. Here's the turf bank. So instead of taking the wall round the turf bank, what they've done is they've just gone straight across the hill. So they've actually gifted Scotland a little part of England. Okay, freedom and all that. We think this could be a barrow, just sitting there beside it, just incidentally. And of course, the people who make the surveys, who make the whole thing possible. Teamwork. That's what it's all about. A great bunch of people to work with. Okay, thank you very much for listening, folks.